raising of our children, and we need to have some good strategies for how to make sure that prayer is an important part of their lives. We don't have detailed information from Ahlul Bayt saying, step 1, step 2, this is exactly how you go through the process to create this culture of prayer. But we have some guidance, and then we can infer a lot of the rest of it to think of how we can practically make this happen in our lives. We have commandments at certain junctures in the life. I'll share one hadith that's probably the most detailed one that we have. Sheikh As-Saduq, he mentions this. The details, anyway, I'll mention the hadith, I'll go through it, and then it'll give us a sense of the progression in this education that we're giving to our children so that they come towards prayer eventually. He narrates this from the 6th Imam, who in turn narrates it from the 5th Imam. قال سمعته يقول, the 6th Imam says, I heard my father say, إذا بلغ الغلام 3 سنين يقال له قل لا إله إلا الله 7 مرات ثم يترك. He says when the child reaches 3 years old, then tell the child, say La ilaha illallah. Say La ilaha illallah 7 times, repeat this, get the child to struggle through and say the words and just parrot you, mimic it. They'll maybe they'll bumble through, maybe they don't know how to say the words yet, whatever it is, but kind of inculcate that in them at that point. Get them to affirm this belief. Of course they have no consciousness, very undeveloped mind, no aql. All those things are not there, but this is one step towards getting them to start uttering this important praise of God. So get them to say that. And then he says, leave him alone. ثُمَّ يُتْرَكْ. Right? At 3 years old, leave him or her. حَتَّى يَتِمَّ لَهُ 3 سِنِينَ وَسَبْعَةُ أَشْهُرٍ وَعِشْرُونَ يَوْمًا. Very specifically, he says, wait now until the child reaches 3 years and 7 months and 20 days. Right, the next instruction is very specific. فَيُقَالُ لَهُ قُلْ مُحَمَّدُ رَسُولُ اللَّهِ 7 مرات. Right, this time you tell them to complete the kalimatul shahada and say Muhammad Rasulullah at this age. 7 times, get them to repeat that. وَيُتْرَكْ حَتَّى يَتِمَّ لَهُ 4 سِنِينَ. Wait until 4 years old next. The next input is at 4. يُقَالُ لَهُ قُلْ 7 مرات صلى الله على محمد وآله. Get them to say salawat at the age of 4. ثُمَّ يُتْرَكْ حَتَّى يَتِمَّ لَهُ 5 سِنِينَ. Next stage is 5 years old. When they get to that age, يُقَالُ لَهُ أَيُّهُمَا يَمِينُكَ وَأَيُّهُمَا شِمَالُكَ. Test the child and say, do you know your right hand from your left hand? Raise your right hand, raise your left hand. If they have the sense to know right from left, right, that says that they've developed some idea of what it means for direction and where this place is, where that place is. So at that stage, if they pass the test and they have that orientation, حَوِّلَ وَجْهُهُ or حَوِّلْ وَجْهَهُ إِلَى الْقِبْلَةِ, and turn the child's face towards Qibla and say, this is the Qibla. Teach them that this is the way for the Kaaba, this is the Qibla, and this is how our life is oriented around the Qibla. Just teach them the direction so they understand the orientation of their life, that the Qibla is in this direction. وَيُقَالُ لَهُ أُسْجُدْ, and you say, do sajda towards Allah in the Qibla direction. ثُمَّ يُتْرَكْ, then leave him alone. حَتَّى يَتِمَّ لَهُ 7 سِنِينَ, until they get to 7 years old. فَإِذَا تَمَّ لَهُ 7 سِنِينَ قِيلَ لَهُ اغْسِلْ وَجْهَكَ وَكَفَّيْكَ. فَإِذَا غَسَلَهُمَا قِيلَ لَهُ صَلِّ ثُمَّ يُتْرَكْ. So at this age, at 7 years, he says, ask the child to wash his face and hands. Not a full-fledged wudu, that's too complicated, just face and hands, just get into the habit. And when they wash their face and their hands, then say, come pray with me. Like, follow me, do the prayer. Don't worry about the details, don't worry about how it is, just they've seen you pray, they know you stand and do ruku, sajda, they'll play and they'll do it. Let them do that with you. حَتَّى يَتِمَّ لَهُ 9 سِنِينَ, until 9 years old. فَإِذَا تَمَّتْ لَهُ عُلِّمَ الْوُضُوء وَضُرِبَ عَلَيْهِ وَأُمِرَ بِالصَّلَاةِ. When they get to 9 years old, then he says, now teach them proper wudu. Still not baligh. If it's a boy, still has a few years till bulugh. If it's a girl, she's either baligha or she's getting close to bulugh. It seems like all the hadith that I see are all with the standard of the boy. We don't have I don't see any hadith where it gives a separate instruction for what to do with girls and which ages. So our understanding is because girls develop faster, their age of bulugh is sooner, then all of these things should be done a little bit earlier for the girl than for the boy, especially as you get a little bit older. Maybe the early ones, 3 years old, 4 years old, doesn't make much difference between the two. But as they get a little bit older, the girls are already starting to develop more maturity, more sense of intellect than the boys at the same age. And so you need to speed up the process and teach them a little faster. So it says at this age, at 9 for the boy, presumably earlier for the girl, then now teach them proper wudu, and now prayer becomes more serious. They're still not baligh, they're still not fully responsible before Allah, but already he's saying this is the time to start enforcing prayer. And this sounds very odd to us, but he says hit them for prayer. Meaning if they don't do it, then this is one of the justification, one of the areas where a parent is justified to use corporal punishment as an ultimatum to get the child to pray. This is the thing, not other things are not important enough, but the prayer is so important that if they're not doing it, reasoning's not working, coercing's not working, all the other methods are not working, then it can reach to this point where you say, I'm gonna discipline you if you don't pray. It's not even wajib. Allah's not going to punish this child yet if he doesn't pray. But the Imam is saying you as a parent have a duty to enforce it at that level. If it comes to it, then you might have to use that, a spank or something like that to encourage it. So, the cultures are different. Now maybe it's not effective to do that anymore. Maybe it's counterproductive now. But the seriousness is something that's universal. The fact that this is a serious thing, this is the thing that you should be strict with, even if you're not strict with other things, but this is the one that you should be strict with. All right, so that's one hadith. And then at the end of the hadith says, فَإِذَا تَعَلَّمَ الْوُضُوءَ وَالصَّلَاةَ غَفَرَ اللَّهُ عَزَّ وَجَلَّ لَهُ وَلِوَالِدَيْهِ إِنْ شَاءَ اللَّهِ. When this child now learns wudu and prayer, then Allah will forgive the child, throughout his life, and He'll forgive the parents who have raised them that way and got them to this point where they're now fledgling prayer offerers of prayer, and they've learned it properly from their parents' instructions and their training. So that I think is the most detailed account that we have for instructions on a year-by-year basis how to progress. Now, understanding the practical reality doesn't work if you just, for instance, if you follow this to the T and say, okay, this one day I'm going to teach them one thing and then that's it for a whole year and nothing else. No more input. So presumably these are milestones. And to get to those milestones and then keep the momentum going, there has to be more continuous input and more continuous training. So it seems like he's not saying just do this once, get him to say this 7 times, then leave him, meaning no more input, no more guidance, no more tarbiyah for the whole year. But this is the level, this is the milestone, he should reach this, and then keep him at that level. Not that you teach him this and then say, don't worry, nothing else, and then next year I have to teach you something different. And then only one time, one input, and then we're done. Right? So there has to be more continuous input, continuous momentum for this to ever take hold and actually become an increasing part of the child's life as they grow. I'll share one more hadith. This relates to both prayer and fasting, and the Imam tells us about his own family culture and how he raises his child, and then he says, and this is what you should do. So he holds his own children to a higher standard, and then he says, but you can do it at this slightly lower standard. This one is also from the 6th Imam, and he's quoting from his father, the 5th Imam. قال إنا نأمر صبياننا بالصلاة إذا كانوا بني 5 سنين. Imam Baqir alayhi salam says that we command our children, Sibyan, we're talking about young children, right? We command our children to pray when they're children of 5 years old. So he says, for you all, فَمُرُوا صِبْيَانَكُمْ بِالصَّلَاةِ إِذَا كَانُوا بَنِي سَبْعَ سِنِينَ. So you all, as my followers, that's too hard of a standard for you. You all, when your children are 7 years old, then you start commanding them to pray. Again, they're not baligha at this point, so there's no wujub. It's not obligatory on the child to pray yet, but this is what the imam is doing. He's telling us to do, so that you can get the children on the right path and then set the momentum in the right direction. And then with regard to fasting, he says, وَنَحْنُ نَأْمُرُ الصِّبْيَانَ بِالصَّوْمِ إِذَا كَانُوا بَنِي سَبْعَ سِنِينَ. For fasting, we as Ahlul Bayt, we command our children to start fasting at the age of 7. بِمَا أَطَاقُوا مِنْ صِيَامِ الْيَوْمِ. Yeah, just whatever they can do. Fasting is much harder. It's not the same as prayer. Prayer, even a 5-year-old can do it, 6-year-old can do it, 3-year-old can do it. But this fasting is harder, of course. So he says, بِمَا أَطَاقُوا مِنْ صِيَامِ. Whatever they can do of the fast. إن كان إلى نصف النهار أو أكثر من ذلك أو أقل فإذا غلبهم العطش والغرث أفطروا. So what does he do? He says that, so we tell them to fast as much as they can fast, maybe half the day, more or less. But once the feeling of thirst overwhelms them, or the feeling of, the word he uses is interesting, instead of ju', which is the normal word for hunger, he uses gharath, which apparently means the slightest, just the first signs of hunger. There's one time when you're full-fledged hungry, and at the very beginning, maybe the first feeling that you say, I think I'm hungry. That first sign, when even that hits the child, then go ahead, break your fast, no problem. The purpose is not to get them to fast the whole day. The purpose is to get them just the whole idea of fasting should be there for a few hours of the day, half the day, whatever they can do. They do it. As soon as they feel a little bit of that they're uncomfortable, then they can break their fast. What's the point? حَتَّى يَتَعَوَّدُوا الصَّوْمِ وَيُطِيقُوهُ. Right? So that they become habituated to fasting, they get used to the idea, and they develop some strength in themselves that they can do it. Once it's a few years, it's going to be wajib on them. So from the early age, you start them so that they get the sense. And we can also add, they get the excitement, the interest. Right? Ramadan especially is very exciting. It's a very socially fun time as well for everyone. And so that momentum, that energy that's there in the community, in your family, it's contagious. You see your children are also excited about waking up for sahur, and iftar is exciting, and fasting a little bit here and there is exciting for them, even if they're very young. And so that's a good part of the fitrah is pulling them towards that. We should encourage that. We should capitalize on their own energy, encourage them, but also be very easy on them. Right? So definitely don't let them do anything that's harmful for them. They don't know enough to protect themselves, to prevent themselves from being getting harm or getting sick, and so we protect them and make sure that they're safe from any bodily harm. So he said that's what we do as Ahlul Bayt. But at the age of 7, we tell our children to fast. فَمُرُوا صِبْيَانَكُمْ إِذَا كَانُوا بَنِي تِسْعِ سِنِينَ بِالصَّوْمِ. So you all, when your boys are 9, then start this fasting and encouraging them to fast. Again, he talks about boys. For girls, at least according to our current fatwa, she would already be baligha. So it should start a little earlier, when she's maybe 7, 6. We don't have a clear age for when to start with the girls, but slightly earlier, so that she's now ready at the age of bulugh, when she's 8 and some months, and she's almost to the age of 9, and she's baligha, then she's already able to fast. All right, so that's one of the ahadith that we have that tells us to start this training early, that there's a higher standard they hold themselves to, and that there's a slightly lower standard they're holding us to. But obviously, again, it can't just start out of the blue. If you have no input into your child until the age of 5 or 7 for prayer, and then all of a sudden at the age of 7 you say, okay, for the first time in their life you're going to start encouraging them or telling them, come pray with me. And every day for the past 7 years, whenever it's prayer time, they're free to play, they're free to do whatever they want to do. There's no connection between them and the thing that the parents are doing. And then all of a sudden you say, no, from today, when I pray, you can't play, you can't do anything else that you want to do, you have to come pray with me. And practically we know that that's not going to be a good recipe for success. It's not easy for anyone to do something so suddenly, especially a child, especially a non-baligh child. They don't have the intellect yet. There's got to be a more gradual onboarding process to get them to the point that when you tell them at 7 that it's a positive experience. It's not supposed to be that I'm going to tell them and sternly and angrily and by hook or by crook you have to do it, and it's got to, kicking and screaming they're doing it, then I'm defeating the whole purpose. We can capitalize on the child's own interest, but we have to do some homework before they reach these ages of 5 and 7 and so forth, so that when we finally do make this request of them, or maybe a little stronger than a request, that it's acceptable that they do it. Maybe they're even excited for it because I've prepared them for this moment. So that's where I think many parents will make a mistake, and they feel like children, when they're very young, they should be totally free, and there should be no input, no idea of disciplining, no tarbiyah, certainly no fasting, no praying, none of these kinds of things. Let the children play, let them be free. And at home, no restrictions, just let them do whatever they want to do. I have to pray, I'll go pray, and let them run around while I'm praying. If you do that, you will eventually end up with this problem. How can you suddenly turn off that switch and say, no playing, now all of a sudden you're going to pray? It doesn't work like that. Now, yes, we're not supposed to take it very seriously with them when they're younger. Right? There's no sense for a 3-year-old or 4-year-old who is still in that very playful mood and has no sense of what prayer even means, to have any sort of strictness with them at that stage would be only counterproductive. They are naturally, that's the time for them then is to play, and all they want to do is play. But what you'll find, if you are disciplined, and if you create the right culture, that play of the child will start to model your prayer. Right? So they, while you're praying and they're coming in and standing next to you, they see you're praying, so they also stand up. A little toddler will do this, 2 years old. They can barely stand, and they'll come and they'll stand next to you. And then when you go to these funny positions, ruku and sujood, it's so funny to them. They'll go into it as well. Maybe the sajda will turn into a somersault, and they'll do a somersault in the sajda. And they're already starting to do the motions of prayer. And while you're focused on your prayer, they're getting into the habit of praying. And then you encourage that. Positive reinforcement, you encourage that. You congratulate them. You say how much you're proud of them for doing that. You give them maybe even treats. Even bribing and treats at that age as a starting point is actually a very reasonable thing to do. Later on, there'll be internal reward for praying and satisfaction with their own prayer. That comes much later. Even for us, maybe we haven't even reached that stage where we find the enjoyment in prayer. That's a very hard thing to find. But we're very encouraged that Allah is going to reward me for prayer. Right? That's a good incentive for all of us, even those of us who are still childlike in our intellectual development and our spiritual development. Allah offers reward and intercession and so many things for us through prayer. And if it works for us, definitely it's going to work for that child. And so you can incentivize at the early stages, and then slowly, as they get closer to bulugh, then you can wean them off of those incentives, external incentives, and try to encourage them for higher purposes. But all that means that you have to have a family culture of taking prayer seriously to begin with. So that's something that many of us need to work on. And prayer should not just be that when I go to the masjid I do Jum'ah prayer, but at home prayer is a free-for-all. If prayer is a free-for-all at home and there's no discipline around it, then it's very unlikely that the child is going to have that sort of sense that this is something special, this is something where I have to be quiet, this is something when there's a different mode of the family at prayer time versus other times. But if you create a family culture, you have a special place for prayer, right, a special room, you have some ceremony around it, there's an adhan that's said, there's jama'ah that's offered together. And jama'ah doesn't mean everyone, it can mean whoever's available. A mother can lead jama'ah with her young children. Father and mother, just 2 people can have jama'ah prayer. Even if it's just one parent at home, the parent with the child can have jama'ah prayer. Either parent, male or female, can have jama'ah prayer with the child. It doesn't matter what the genders are at that age. Even a mother can lead with her son, for instance, and it's Jama'ah prayer. Right? But you have to have the discipline to do that. If you create that atmosphere, that at prayer time, everyone's praying. Because prayer time comes and everyone prays at their own schedule. So one person's praying, everyone else is just doing their own things. Well, the child would rather be with everyone who's doing their own things and they can continue to play than to come with this one person who's doing the boring thing, which is just praying. But if the entire family is now gathered to pray, then the place to be is with everyone, and so the child is also going to be there naturally. And with a little bit of encouragement, a little bit of coercion, a little bit of these kinds of inputs, then the child can be encouraged to be orderly, to sit on a sajada, to not be bothersome to the others, to sit with some discipline. Right? Within the reason of what that child is capable of doing at that age. So we're not expecting them to have a perfect prayer and not look around or anything like that. They can look around, that's fine. Let's do their play, but in a way that's not bothersome. That's those are stages that they've come towards joining Jama'ah prayer and recognizing this is something important. Then there's a chance that when they come to the masjid, they know, prayer means, I know what that means. I know how to sit orderly. I know this is the time when I have to stand in one place, I can't move around. This is the time I'm going to be next to my parent, and I have to stay in an orderly fashion because this is what I do every day at home. I know prayer time is a different thing than playtime. So the masjid is also prayer time, something different from playtime. If it doesn't work, if you don't have that discipline at home, the child's not raised at home, and then they come to the masjid, of course, they don't even know what prayer is. They don't even know what the discipline of prayer is. So then they're going to be running around and grabbing people's torbas and playing and making noise because it doesn't faze them. They don't even realize that they're doing anything wrong because they've never had any input from parents to know that this is the way to behave during prayer, and this is something you shouldn't do during prayer. So that has to happen in the home, which means that you have to do it. Right? Raising children, the best way to do it is to do it yourself. You be like you want to model for them, not that you do something else and tell them, I'm not praying right now, but you should go pray. Right? I'm not going to pray in Jama'ah. I'm too busy right now with my work. I have too many things to do, but no, it's prayer time. You guys have to go pray. Well, that's a really bad mixed message, and the dominant message there is prayer is not too important because I'm not prioritizing it. The right message would be, no, it's prayer time. I'm going to put everything else aside. I'm going to pray. We're all going to pray together in Jama'ah. And here are the etiquettes. Here's the adab for prayer. You also come join us. You're raised like this. Every day at prayer time, this is what happens. This is what you do. And that overflows into other disciplines. So even maybe prayer time we're okay in the masjid, but sometimes during speeches, as the one facing the audience, we realize that how many people are getting up and leaving and walking and coming back, and it's distracting to us. Certainly, you're not getting anything out of it because you're back and forth. And then your children see you getting up and getting down, then of course they're going to model the same thing. So it's one of the challenges, especially for the volunteers in the masjid. I know they have many duties. But oftentimes, you see the volunteers are the ones who are never sitting, or if they sit for 2 minutes and they get up. And then their children follow them, get up. So the volunteers' children tend to be the ones who are running around because they see their parents are always running around. So I don't know what the solution is for the volunteers. Of course, they have duties, so they have to do those duties. But if they can do it in a way, maybe find a way to do it so it's not setting the wrong model for their children, that their children become the ones who are running around the most. But rather they know that they have to sit. I'm doing something important that I to make the masjid run. I have to run around. But this is the time you have to sit. When you become a volunteer, when you're my age, then you might have to do some other things as well. But right now, this is the time for you to sit, and sit next to the parent, always, not by yourself, not with friends, where you're tempted to talk and play around. Yeah. So those are some things to think about, so that we can start to create this culture and improve this culture, not only in the masjid, in the public-facing times, but it starts right at home in the way that we conduct prayer and run our household and create that culture. Sallu ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Qul huwa Allahu ahad, Allahu samad, lam yalid wa lam yulad, wa lam yakul lahu kufuwan ahad. اللهم صل على بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد والثناء لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على أشرف الأنبياء محمد وعلى أهل بيته الطيبين الطاهرين اللهم صل على محمد رسول الله وعلى علي أمير المؤمنين وعلى فاطمة الزهراء وعلى الحسن والحسين وعلي بن الحسين ومحمد بن علي وجعفر بن محمد وموسى بن جعفر وعلي بن موسى ومحمد بن علي وعلي بن محمد والحسن بن علي والحجة بن الحسن القائم المهدي صلوات الله عليهم أجمعين. صل على محمد وآل محمد. Once again, I admonish all of us to foster taqwa within ourselves. This prayer, one of the keys of prayer is this is a manifestation of that taqwa. No one else is looking, Allah is looking. Allah wants me to pray, even if I'm by myself, it's just me and Him, and I'm praying to Him. This taqwa is what's the strength of our morality. It keeps us always in line, always thinking that and knowing that Allah is watching, and that is our guiding light. Let me share a few more ahadith about the same theme. So we've been talking about prayer and our children, and what are some ways that Ahlul Bayt are telling us to abide by this commandment from Allah, وَأْمُرْ أَهْلَكَ بِالصَّلَاةِ وَاصْطَبِرْ عَلَيْهَا. Command your family to pray and be persevering in that effort to get prayer into the life of your family. In another tradition from Imam as-Sadiq alayhi salam, the transmitter Muawiyah ibn Wahab says, "Kam yu'khadu as-sabi bis-siyam." Fi kam yu'khadu as-sabiyu bis-siyam. So he asks, with regard to fasting, at what age should I kind of take fasting seriously with my child and maybe command them to do it, expect them to do it? The Imam says, "Ma baynahu wa bayna 15 sana wa 14 sana, fa in huwa sama qabla dhalika fada'hu." He says when he reaches about 14 to 15 years, then he'll be responsible for the prayer. So here he's talking about the age of taklif, and we have different formulations for it, different ahadith for which age the bulugh comes in for boys and for girls, but this is the higher end, 14 to 15 years. In our times, definitely the child should be well, not definitely, but very likely the child should be baligh by then. If not, then by the time they reach 15, they're definitely responsible. But he says before that, if the child fasts, then fada'hu, let him fast, allow him to fast. It's not that before the age of bulugh there's no fasting, encourage him or leave him to fast. Then he says, وَلَقَدْ صَامَ ابْنِي فُلَانٍ قَبْلَ ذَلِكَ فَتَرَكْتُهُ. He says, even this is the sixth Imam, he says, when one of my children was fasting before this age, I encouraged him to fast, I let him fast. So there's nothing wrong with fasting earlier. In the other hadith, actually, they're encouraging fasting at an earlier age as well. But again, the same point is there. That implication is what I wanted to focus on, that it doesn't work if they never fast at all, and now at the age of bulugh, you say, okay, now for the first time you're going to fast. Then that's a tall order. That's very difficult. The culture has to be there from before, and many of us do that. When they're younger, even we have good programs here where the children are encouraged to fast. They're rewarded if they fast half a day or some hours of the day, then they're rewarded. So those kinds of programs are good. You as a family can also encourage them to do some fasting at some points, maybe on weekends, whenever it's easy, shorter days, whatever it might be, but encourage some fasting from the younger children, and then reward them and encourage them so that they get that interest, and that then inshallah that'll grow into duty by the time they become baligh and baligha. Not only for prayer, this other hadith from the sixth Imam says to his companion, Ya Aba Harun, inna na'muru sibyanana bi tasbih Fatima. We tell our young children to do this tasbih of Fatima al-Zahra. Kama na'muruhum bis salah, the same way we command them to pray. This sibyan, so sibyan is young. Sabi is used for young, non-baligh child, right? Toddlers and those younger ages. And so our young children, we tell them to pray. Here it's encouraging them because it's not wajib. You encourage them to pray. We also encourage them to do tasbih al-Zahra. And that's sometimes easier, sometimes it's more fun, having this, the subha. This you call it tasbih is the action. You do tasbih. Tasbih means to say subhanallah. Right? The thing you use to do tasbih is called a subha. In Urdu, people call that a subha, a tasbih. That's wrong. The thing the beads are called subha. So that's more fun for the child. Now you have something in your hand. It's fun to have the beads, and so it's like a physical, tangible connection to their ibadah. It's not just with no props. It's harder for the child to connect, but with a prop in their hand, then it's easier for them to connect to it. Or with their fingers, if they learn how to use the knuckles of their fingers to count, then that also is something physical, so they can connect with that easier. He says, فَالْزَمْهُ فَإِنَّهُ لَمْ يَلْزَمْهُ عَبْدٌ فَشَقِيًا. So kind of be diligent in, it's not clear, it seems like he's saying be diligent in the tasbih al-zahra, be very regular, always do it after prayers, before you sleep. And those are times when it's highly recommended to do tasbih al-zahra. And it seems like in the context, he's also encouraging you, stick with the encouragement of your children to do the salah and the tasbih al-zahra, that we also do this. And if you do it, he says, and you are regular with the tasbih, he says no person ever fails and becomes wretched and becomes miserable if they are diligent in tasbih al-zahra. This is one of those secrets to barakah in your life, to connection with God, to connection with Ahlul Bayt. And so keep this up in your life. It's very simple, not very time consuming, very easy to do, but the reward and the connection and the barakah is very good. Recite salawat ala Muhammad wa And there's one hadith in Al-Kafi about jama'ah with children. So this is also one of the challenges today. They're preparing for an event, so the children aren't here from the school, but this is sometimes one of the challenges that we face. So the Imam says, كان علي بن الحسين يأمر الصبيان يجمعون بين المغرب والعشاء ويقول هو خير من أن يناموا عنها. So with regard to, this is, in those days, now it's so standard, we always pray 2 prayers together. Dhuhrain prayers we pray together, Isha'ain prayers we pray together, and that's just the way you do it. If you split it, everyone thinks something's wrong with you. Why are you splitting it up and praying it separately? It seems like you become Sunni or something, right? So that's a kind of a distorted culture where it's become so standard. You always pray your prayers together. We see in Ahlul Bayt's practice many times it was separated, and actually the fadila times are separate. And then sometimes they would combine. And so both are permissible. It's perfectly fine to combine it. It's much easier to combine it. But we shouldn't think that that's the natural way or that's the standard way. That's always the way. If you can, split it up. In fact, according to some of our marajah, the fadila time for asr doesn't start right after dhuhr. If you want to pray your prayers at fadila time, you should delay your asr prayer for about an hour and a half, 2 hours, 2 hours to 2.5 hours, and then pray your asr. Otherwise, you're missing fadila time. Fadila time doesn't start. So if your dhuhr time is 12:05, your asr prayers fadila time doesn't start till 2:05, 2:15, 2:20. Then fadila kicks in for asr. Yeah. So you're missing fadila by praying it early. You think you're praying it early. You're praying it on. That's good. You're doing well. No, you should delay it. Then you get fadila. Yeah. Maghrib and Isha is closer. Like Maghrib fadila time is very short, and Isha starts quite soon after. So if you do Maghrib, pray your nafilah prayers, then Isha fadila time starts. So there, combining it makes sense. But the culture of that time was to split it up. They would pray their Maghrib, and then maybe some people would engage in more ibadah, some people would go home, maybe have dinner, then come back and pray Isha afterwards. But so the Imam in this hadith, this is Imam Zayn al-Abidin, says that he would command the young children in the family or in the community to go ahead and pray their Isha with their Maghrib. It's exceptional. Not that this is standard practice. He said, let them go ahead and pray their Isha so they don't go fall asleep. Because bedtimes were early then. Once it's dark, what are you going to do in a pre-modern time? There's nothing to do after dark. You have to have a candle, whatever you can do by candlelight. That's all you can do. Otherwise, there's nothing else to do. And so the standard practice to fall asleep after it gets dark. So they pray their Maghrib, and then he would say, let the boys go ahead and pray Isha as well with the Maghrib. It's better than they go home, have dinner, and then they fall asleep and they miss Isha prayer. Right, so that's also interesting. Sometimes we get kind of like between the lines, clues into culture, into practices through the hadith. The hadiths point to something else, but we understand some things about the realities of life then and how the imams practice things by looking at this. And the last hadith I'll share with you is also about children in the Jama'ah. The transmitter asked the fifth Imam, Imam Baqir alayhi salam, عن الصبيان إذا صفوا في الصلاة المكتوبة. What about young boys, young children when they line up to pray in the Jama'ah? So it's not fully clear what the scenario is, but imagine, so you have a line of boys, so maybe the question is, are they going to mess with the connection? Or are they going to play with each other and just distract everyone else? Or is it going to cause a barrier between men and women? So maybe some of these are the questions, but he doesn't make clear what the question is, but the Imam answers. He says, لا تؤخروهم عن الصلاة المكتوبة وفرقوا بينهم. So for the answer it becomes a little bit clear. He's saying, don't, one possibility, لا تؤخروهم, means don't put the boys to the back of the Jama'ah. Right? You just imagine if they're here and there, and you say, oh, let's get the kids out of the Jama'ah, let's consign them all to the back. Once you put them to the back, then there's no supervision, they're all together, it's much more tempting to play and to fool around. Whereas if they're amongst the adults, then there's more discipline, they can have some oversight from others to mentor them and keep them in line, right? So he says, don't do ta'khir, don't put them at the back of the Jama'ah, rather farriquhum. I split them up and pepper them through the Jama'ah, so they're the same process. They're mentored. They can learn from the adults rather than learning from each other. They learn from each other. They just play. They learn from the adults, and hopefully they'll improve in their etiquette for the prayer. The other possibility is la tu'akhiruhum, mean don't kick them out of the Jama'ah. These people might say, oh, they're too loud, they're too noisy, they're too this and that. Let's just get rid of them. If they're too loud in the majlis, let's just have a different room, have a playroom for the kids. And when they're old enough to sit in the majlis, old enough to sit in the Jama'ah, then we'll bring them in. Well, that might make it very blissful for a few years, but then the problem is, how are you going to get them back in? If they've never learned how to be in a Jama'ah, how to pray, what a majlis is, what are the etiquettes of the majlis, how do you sit in the majlis, they're not used to it. They're used to always being able to play and do things that are, at their very young level. They're not being pulled up and uplifted. They're not aspiring to be an adult in the adult program. Then if you bring them in at 10 years old and say, okay, now I know you've been playing all these 10 years, but now from today you're going to sit in the majlis. That's going to be a very hard struggle for the child and definitely for the parent. How do you get them to do that all of a sudden from 0 to 60 in one majlis? That doesn't work. Yeah, so the Imam also says, don't do that. Don't la tu'akhiruhum, don't kick them out. Keep them there. Farriquhum, split them up so that they you can moderate their misbehavior, train them, mentor them, get them used to the Jama'ah, and lift them up into the culture. If you kick them out, then you may never get them back in. And if they do come back in, they'll have no idea how to behave because you haven't trained them properly. Right, so these are some things to think about in our home culture, in our own practice of prayer, getting our family to pray Jama'ah, pray with discipline, put things aside, dedicate time to pray so that it becomes your family culture. That's great. It becomes your children's identity and culture. And then, of course, that will also transfer. An added bonus is it'll transfer into the public space, into the masjid, and they will know how to pray. They'll know how to be part of the Jama'ah. Then the whole community benefits, and people are not distracted, and it uplifts the entire community. Sallu ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم اللهم اغفر للمؤمنين والمؤمنات والمسلمين والمسلمات الأحياء منهم والأموات. Allah, we ask you to shower your mercy and blessings on Muhammad and the family of Muhammad. Have mercy on us, forgive us for all of our sins. Help us to make prayer the central feature of our lives, the focal point of our lives, and grant us the intercession of Ahlul Bayt, which they have promised for those who take prayer seriously. And we pray for all the suffering and pain and dhulm that's happening in this world. You, Allah, are the only solution for this. Send your Imam back so he can fill this world with justice and rid us of all the injustice, and have mercy on all those who are suffering, and protect us and all the believers from that suffering. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم إن الله يأمر بالعدل والإحسان وإيتاء ذي القربى وينهى عن الفحشاء والمنكر والبغي يعظكم لعلكم تذكرون.